welcome to day 4 of the Great Hiatus. I want to thank everyone, first of all, for all the great questions that you submitted yesterday. Again, as promised, we're going to get to as many of those as we can in the days and weeks, possibly, ahead. If you didn't get to ask a question yesterday, I still encourage you to take part if you would like. Let's just make yesterday's Instagram post the place to put all those questions. Again, that's open to alums, that's open to everybody. We'll try to prioritize things seniors first if we can. But again, if you didn't get to ask a question, it is still a possibility. And just a general thing, I want to thank everyone for staying in touch. Please continue to do that. Please continue to correspond with me, with Mrs. Beringer, with Mrs. West. Again, this is the time to kind of draw the webs of the community closer together. I think everyone out there is doing a fantastic job of that, so let's make it continue. Now, questions. We're going to try to get to a couple in today's segment, and as promised, we're going to try to hit seniors first. So, our very first question today comes from user Jake Shaffrin, who asks, why do raccoons look like little robbers? I love their little eye mask, but I always wanted to know why. Well, I didn't until this question came in. And I could pretend to you that I knew the answer to this without having to look it up. That would be a lie. I did not. I had to do some research, but I want to thank Jake Shaffrin for this question because otherwise I wouldn't have done it. And I did learn some stuff along the way. So the two things to consider here, one of them is the literary tradition of how raccoons got their masks, and then there's the scientific tradition. And the literary tradition I knew a little bit about. I knew that there were some folk tales about how the raccoon got its mask. A lot of those come from Native American culture, and there are two in particular that I thought I'd share with you. So the first one has to do with the raccoon and the raven. And the raven, as you may know, has a reputation as something of a scavenger. So in the story, the raven had brought back to its domicile, in this story, the raven lives in a house, poetic license, suspension of disbelief, call it what you will. Anyway, the raven had brought back to its house these 5 silver rings, and the raccoon noticed them and thought, hey, I want those. So the raccoon put on a mask, broke in one night, took the 5 silver rings. The next day, Raven questioned the raccoon and said, hey, did you see who took those rings? And the raccoon lied and said, no, I didn't see it. But Raven was able to call out raccoon on this lie because raccoon had put the 5 silver rings on its tail, but it also dragged its tail through the soot from Raven's fireplace. And therefore, raccoon's tail was marked with the familiar pattern of rings. So, in this story, Raven not only is a scavenger, but had the power to make those markings permanent. So Raven marked raccoon permanently with the rings on its tail and also with the mask around its face. That's one tale. The second one that I found, and I kind of like this one better, it's more interesting to me anyway, is that raccoon had eaten all of its grandmother's acorns, all the acorns she had saved up for the winter. And raccoon's grandmother was so angry that she grabbed a poker from the fireplace and marked him about the face with this hot poker in the familiar design that we now know. Now, if you remember Survey Creative Nonfiction and some of the violent grandmother stories that surfaced during that class, and you know, hey, I'm not the guy who invented this stuff. Like, there is a long literary tradition of violent grandmothers, and this is just part of it. So that's a second story about how the raccoon got its mask. So that's the tradition from fable. Now, the scientific part of this, which I admit I don't know anything about, it turns out that there are 3 possible ideas, at least 3 possible ideas, about why the raccoon is marked the way it's marked. The first one is that the mask of the raccoon helps raccoons identify one another in the wild, so it serves some kind of identification purpose. The second idea is that the mask of the raccoon is actually similar to the markings that pandas have around their eyes. And the reason for this, according to this theory, is that raccoons and pandas have kind of small eyes naturally. The markings around the eyes make their eyes look bigger, and this makes them look more threatening to predators. So, in this idea, the markings around the eyes of raccoons help them to fend off predators because it makes their eyes look bigger, and therefore they look like more of a threat. And then there's one other idea, and this one I think is kind of most interesting, which is that the markings around the eyes of raccoons serve the same kind of purpose as when athletes put black under their eyes to kind of cut the glare from lights, whether sunlight, whether from playing under lights. But the idea is that because raccoons are nocturnal and omnivorous, they spend a lot of their time foraging for food in and around water. So this theory suggests that raccoons have the black around their eyes because the black actually helps to cut the glare from, let's say, the moonlight reflecting off a pond or a stream. So it actually helps the raccoons to see better and become more effective hunters at night. So, 3 theories about why raccoons have their masks from the scientific tradition. Now, the only thing to add to this is that I think in our popular literature, we have kind of gone back in recent years to this idea that the Native Americans popularized, which is that the raccoon, because of its mask, is a trickster figure, is marked by its mask in some negative way. And I think everyone will be familiar with this from a movie that I'm sure many people have seen. And I think this clip really suggests something that is borne out in my own experience, which is if you've ever seen a group of raccoons emerge from a sewer, if you've ever seen this group of raccoons, each of which probably weighs upwards of 25 pounds, bigger than a lot of domestic dogs, if you've ever seen these raccoons come out of the sewer with the express purpose of pillaging your garbage can, if you've ever seen one of them rear up on its hind legs, as in that movie clip, then you know something important, which is raccoons are bad. Don't come back at me with this idea. They're cute. They have fingers. Yes, I know. They have fingers. There are inmates all over the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who also have fingers and who, at one time, were thought to be cute by somebody for some reason. So, that is, I think, all we'll say about raccoons today. And I hope, Mr. Shaffrin, that answers your excellent question. Now, we have time for a second question today. And this one comes to us from user jvl.es. Hey, I protect people's privacy around here. I know who it is. Anyway, this user asks, are there any books you'd recommend us to read during this break? Yes, there are. And for ease of use, I picked 5. 5 is just a nice number, I think, for something like this. And I'm going to tier them from easiest to most difficult. But the reason that I picked these 5 is that I think all 5 of these have some applicability beyond just the text themselves. In other words, all 5 of these have ideas that you're going to find elsewhere in our culture. So they're not just books to be read for the pleasure of reading books, which I certainly recommend, but also because they all have bigger ideas that you're going to encounter elsewhere. So they're going to help you twice, thrice, multiple times if you read them. So in the easy tier of this are 2 books that I don't think will surprise anybody. Many of you have read them, in fact, as part of the middle school program. And those would be The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger and The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. The Catcher in the Rye, I don't think a lot needs to be said about this. that I haven't said in other places and at other times already. Uh, Holden Caulfield is really, in a lot of ways, the first literary teenager. This book is really the progenitor of anything that we could call the young adult genre. Uh, Everybody who has worked in this field owes some kind of debt to Holden Caulfield, to J.D. Salinger. You're going to see so much of this book, I think, once you read it throughout the culture. It just makes sense to go back and investigate it. And it makes sense even if you start reading it and you are like some people and you hate Holden Caulfield and everything you think he stands for. Uh, it's still one you ought to check off your list while you are still in high school. The Tipping Point is a nonfiction book for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. It deals with the spread of things, the spread of epidemics. And of course, in our current climate, that has some particular significance, but it's not just about diseases. Gladwell is talking about how trends are spread. And again, in the couple of decades since this book has been published, there is so much of this book that has found its way into our culture that I think you will recognize parts of it upon reading it. If you've never read it before, I think you'll recognize parts of it almost immediately. But apart from that, there's another reason to suggest this book, and that is that Gladwell does this thing that I think is so important, and he does it so well. And that is that he's able to take difficult ideas and make them apprehendable to just about any reader. And he doesn't do it by dumbing things down. He doesn't do it by treating the reader as a child. He's just one of those people who has a gift for being able to take complicated ideas and synthesize them into easily readable and pleasurably readable text. And if you're one of those people who's thinking about maybe after high school a career in medicine, a career in the sciences, a career in politics or public policy, or some non-creative writing related field, then I think this is a book that's really important for you, because I think you ought to try to figure out, how does this guy do what he does, and how could I do it? Because I think it's such an important skill. So, The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And of course, if you read it and you like it, then what he does well there, I think he does well in all his other books, including his new book, Talking to Strangers, which I'm now working my way through. So, again, there's a lot more where that came from, if it turns out that you like it. One thing that people may have heard me say, because I do say it a lot, is something about the importance of treating the Bible as a literature, and how important the Bible is, and understanding the Bible is to understanding our culture. And the natural question a lot of people ask when I go off on one of these tirades is, okay, but where do I start? So I think I would make the suggestion that if you're really interested in this, in treating the Bible as a secular work of literature, I would say that the best place to start would probably be with the Gospel of Mark in the New Testament. There are 4 Gospels, as some of you know. Mark's Gospel is the most matter-of-fact. It just gets to the details. It's kind of journalistic in that sense. But it also contains lots and lots of things that have become literary allusions. He talks about a lot of the parables, like the parable of the mustard seed. You will see some very familiar expressions in Mark's Gospel, like render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Where do a lot of these ideas in our culture come from? They come from the Bible. A lot of them come from the Gospels. And if you're looking for a place to start, I would say the Gospel of Mark is probably the best of all possible places. So, Bible as literature, Mark's Gospel, that is a third recommendation I would make. And that's kind of the intermediate tier. Now, the more difficult stuff. And when I say difficult stuff, I'm talking maybe not as much about text as context. But I want to make these recommendations because some people will have already read the first 3. So, a book that I think makes a lot of sense right now is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. And I say it makes a lot of sense because it's a nonfiction book. It's one of the most famous nonfiction books written. And it's the story of his year, it's actually a little bit more than a year, his year spent by Walden Pond in Massachusetts in solitude, or mostly in solitude. It's a slow-paced book. There's not a lot of action. It is very descriptive, especially descriptive of nature. And it's one of those books that I think you need some time to really process. So now, when you might, in theory, have that time, now might be a good time to give this one a ride. And certainly the idea of solitude, of isolation, of he wasn't in quarantine, but there are some similarities there. The idea makes some sense perhaps during our great hiatus. So consider this one. If you get a copy like this, you'll also probably get some of his other significant writings like Civil Disobedience. But this one I would definitely recommend as a book that you really ought to try to read while you're in high school. And then a fifth book, and I think probably the most difficult out of all of these, would be Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And I think it's difficult because if you've read any Kafka, and I know some of you have, if you've read any Joseph Conrad, and I know some of you have, it's similarly slow-paced. Some of the slow pace is syntactical. It takes a while to get through it. There's some action in Crime and Punishment. There is some crime, and yes, there is some punishment. But this is a book that also needs a little bit of time to marinate. However, I think if you do accept that challenge, I think you will be repaid. I think you will see a lot of ideas, once again, that have filtered from this book and into our culture, even if you didn't recognize them as such when you encountered them. So, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, I think that's one that would be a fitting conclusion to this set of 5 recommendations. So thank you for that question. I might have more to suggest, maybe at a later date in a future Q&A session. But those are my 5 for right now. I'm sticking to it. Okay, I think that's probably good enough for today. Actually, wait, hold on. I'm going to do one more. Bonus question. This is important. This one is really important. And it comes from 3 a.m. Coffee Run, who wrote more than 24 hours ago, when is my dad coming back from the grocery store? Well, 3 a.m. Coffee Run, I don't want to be one of those people who always answers a question with a question, but I got to ask you, did your dad go out in search of one of these? Because if he did, he might still be out there, and he might be out there for a while. Don't be alarmed. I'm sure you find one of these somewhere. And you won't have to be like the raccoon and affect a B&E of a friend's house in order to get one. I think. Anyway, I hope your dad is back. 3 a.m. Coffee Run. I hope that's true of all households where the head of household had to go out to do some foraging. I hope it doesn't end up for them like for the raccoon. I hope it doesn't end up that way for any of you. Again, thanks for all your questions. Please do remember to follow us across social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Twitter is a place where we're trying to post a lot of updates of contest opportunities and things that might otherwise occupy you during this great hiatus. So please make sure to check all of those. We will have this video up on YouTube, on our brand new YouTube channel, and we'll add to that as we can. But I want to thank everyone, again, for participating on behalf of Mrs. Beringer, Mrs. West, and on behalf of Mr. Cameron, who did our most excellent theme music, our bumper music, which you're going to be hearing a lot more of, I guess, in the days ahead. So thanks to all of them, and we will see you very soon, probably on day 5 tomorrow of the great hiatus. I hope that everyone's great hiatus really is great so far, or at least pretty good. Thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you again very soon.